back in the late 90s, our list size had gone up by 1,000 patients in a year. We got no more room in our building to put any more doctors or nurses, or no more building plot left to build anything on. We got greater demand for appointments than availability, and we had extras added to our surgery. The surgeries ran late, the patients were unhappy, the staff were stressed, and the doctors were stressed. Now, I'm pleased to say in the 18 years that have followed, all of these problems have been wiped out by the changes in the NHS. So we had this dream of having a happier working life. And we had a dream that it'd be lovely to work less and perhaps even earn more, and know what our workload was every day, and get away for our half day and never have a patient complain, and reduce our stress and work in a happy environment. And people laughed at us, including us, but that was our dream. And we had a dream also, because we are doctors after all, that we'd see patients when they wanted to be seen and by whom they wanted, and that we'd see the illest people first, and that the DNAs would disappear. And that's what it was, a dream, because there's no way you can do both, of course, is there? And we ran a standard system at the time, which was 10-minute appointments. Patients were booked in by the receptionists, and we got about a 2 to 3 week wait to see us. And I always ran late, as you heard. Nightmare. Now, we dabbled a little with nurse triaging, which, well, first of all, there weren't any, and so we trained them. And that worked really well for a week or two until practice next door poached them. It is difficult to come across some that are both good and cost effective, because you basically, it's all to do with your conversion rates and how many patients they end up seeing compared to, or putting in with the doctors compared to how many they help on the phone. And if that ratio goes lower than about 60-odd%, then you might as well just see them. So, one of my partners said to me, I think what we should do is talk to people on the telephone. If you're a practice and you just want something that's easy to do, you might go to Telephone Consulting 1, where you don't have to get rid of any backlog. You just start talking to people on the phone. Basically, one doctor can help about 9,000 or 10,000 patients in that system. Yeah, and it's fine. The problem is that if you start to get any bigger than that, you need more doctors. But it works, and it works well. But then I thought, well, there is this 2-week wait for a routine appointment, so what are we going to do about that? So I thought, we'll combine what they did in advanced access, we'll get rid of the backlog, and then never let it build up. So how did we do that? Well, with Telephone Consulting 2, so it's just the same as Telephone Consulting 1, except you clear the backlog first, yeah? And then anybody who wants to book an appointment in the future has to speak to the doctor. So they can still book an appointment, but it has to go through the doctor. The downside of all of these is if you're the telephone doctor, you've only got a few little slots for you, and most of the people you talk to end up seeing somebody else. And clinically, it's not quite as satisfying for some people as seeing everybody, themselves. So let's talk a bit about Doctor First now. So the backlog is removed, like in the others. The receptionists evenly distribute the day calls between the doctors, and if you've got a nurse practitioner, you can use the nurse practitioners as well. And then it's up to the clinicians how they manage their day. And what you do is, because you can't do everything at once, you actually talk to people first thing in the morning, because that's when the big spike of calls comes in. Yeah. And even if you've got access like we've got, where you can come any day you like, you still get this spike of calls at the beginning of the day. And it's not to say you can't see anybody earlier in the day. You can, of course. It's up to you as the clinician how you do it, how you spread your day about. And equally, it's up to you, the clinician, how you use your follow-ups and what you do from the follow-up point of view. Now, there clearly are people you do want to follow up, and there are ways to do that. But basically, most patients have got once they believe in the system, they'll just phone on the day they want, and they'll come in that day. This is an example of the conversion rate, just to show I'm not telling any fibs from a surgery that we work with, and their conversion rate was about 31% of people they spoke to people that wanted to come in. This is a surgery how long each call took, so it's less than a minute, less than 2 minutes, 3, 4, 5, etc. But on average, the average call is less than 3 minutes when you do all of the maths. Because you're actually, as soon as you've decided you want to see them, you see them. You don't have to take a full history because you're going to do that when you see them. It's the ones that you're not going to see that you need to spend longer with. So you just have to take it at face value that those are the results. And what happens, therefore, this is why it works, is if you look at a standard system at 10-minute appointments, 18 patients would take 3 hours, whereas with the Doctor First system, you can talk to 3 people, well, you can talk to more than that, but you can talk to at least 3 people in 10 minutes on average, which is 1 hour's worth of work for 18 people, of which a third will want to be seen, so that's 6 patients, which is another hour's work. And the outcome, therefore, is what took 3 hours now takes 2, or if you flip it the other way round, in 3 hours you can help 27 people rather than 18, which is a 50% increase in productivity. And this is the outcome of those calls. So 78% want to be seen on the day. So if somebody has got no preference, by the way, see them on the day that they phone you, because otherwise you just push, it's like pushing snow in front of you, you just get a bigger pile of snow if you keep doing it. You've got to deal with it. So 6% wanted 1 day ahead, 2 days ahead, 3, 4, a week or more, and then visits and stuff. But you have to remember that although it's 50% more efficient, it's still got a finite limit. And the times when it falls down is when people don't appreciate that you know, no matter how good your system is, you've still got to have some bums on seats helping people. And if you're a practice with 6 doctors in and 5 are away, it will be a really bad day, even with Doctor First, for the one that's left. So how do you predict the future when we all know it's impossible? Well, the answer is, even though we're all individuals and we all think individually, which of course we do, as a group, we behave as groups behave. So what this does is it shows, this is another thing that's on the tool, it actually shows you how much contact time in hours and minutes. So you can see Mondays, the clinicians are working 2 hours and 45 minutes for each session. Tuesday's a bit quieter in the afternoon, as is Wednesday. But Friday, you can see they're actually working 4 hours 48 in the morning and 2 hours 17 in the afternoon. So if you add those, that's about 7 hours. Now you might decide as a practice that you're happy to not employ a locum for that, but to do it yourself, or you might decide if it's going to be like that for several days in the week that you actually want to employ locums to cover the gaps. But it puts you back in control. You're not firefighting all the time, yeah. And it's this ability to predict the future that's the key thing. So once you can do it for a practice, you can do it for a CCG, and you get a CCG overview with list sizes and everything else. And that you can look at, this is a real CCG, well, I've obviously taken the names off, but it shows you every practice, whatever system they're using, because the tool does it, it works out different things for different systems. It shows you where their hotspots and their cool spots are. And so as the CCG, you can see where you need extra people, and you can see where you've got extra people. So all these amber ones, you've got more people than you actually need on those sessions. Yeah, so you can see if there's a hotspot, and if it's good, if there's loads of people on holiday, for example, you'll be able to see where A&E is likely to be more busy. So this is just an example of different cohorts within a CCG, and you can see that this particular cluster does a lot of telephone consulting with face-to-faces, and their number of DNAs is considerably smaller than the other clusters. So how do you do it whilst retaining care? Well, the good news is that 99% of people get seen on the day of their choice, and virtually all get seen by the clinician of their choice. The other thing that was a surprise to us, but when you think about it, it's blooming obvious why, is that you end up with the most qualified person making the most important decision, which is when the patient's going to get seen. Actually, it's not even me, it's the patient that decides that. So what happens is you end up with a lot less complaints, it saves you a lot of stress therefore, and it saves you, as we've discovered, a lot of time. Okay, so because you've got less demand, you've got more time to help people, you can give them longer appointments when they need them. I am the best receptionist I ever had, for the simple reason that I know intuitively how long a particular problem is going to take. and so I will give myself the right amount of time. And that results obviously in a better service for the patients and a lot less staff stress on your staff. What happens is the receptionist put the patient's name on the appointment screen and with a brief description of the problem, should the patient be happy to give it. They don't have to, but most do. And then a contact number, or if I'm free, they put them straight through to me. You know, that's just my preference. It saves about 30 seconds a call. Yeah. And we used to have one big long list of calls for Dr. First, and all of the doctors would take the names, you know, off it as they came in. Well, not as they came in, you actually take them in the order of clinical priority. That's why you need that little bit of information, yeah? You don't take them in chronological order, you take them in clinical order, yeah? So what would happen, of course, is you might have, let's say there's 5 doctors consulting. If you've got 100 calls on your list, 5 doctors look at it and go, dear God, there's 100 calls on my list, yeah? And whereas if you split them, of course, they've got 20. Well, oh, 20, that's all right. That's no problem at all. That. What we do is we encourage practices to record the outcomes of their telephone consultations with a small code at the end. It depends which system they use, whether it's EMIS or System 1 or whatever. But they record their outcomes, and then you can do charts that show it. So then we can. It makes it much easier for us if we go back to helper practice. We can look and see where they're falling into problems, and we can identify individuals who might be struggling and help them. What we found actually, we helped a practice in Peterborough a number of years ago now, who were very proud of how low their visit request was. And when they started doing this, it fell by about 46%, I think it fell by. And it's because the whole thing with visits is you treat them in exactly the same way. You assume that you are going to see each other on a visit when you start the conversation. Yeah? And it's amazing how often they don't want to see you when you get to the end of the conversation. But you take the pressure out, because the very first thing we ever did with something like this was talk to anybody who wanted a visit. And of course, it didn't take very long for them to cotton on to the fact that if we were speaking to them, we were trying to get out of the visit. Yeah? But because of this system, everybody gets spoken to, and they all know that. You don't get that, especially when they say, can you do a visit for me? You say, yeah, of course, what's the problem? And you go through the problem, and at least 50% of the time, you don't need to go. And that's not because you don't want to go, it's because they don't want you to go. From the point of view of satisfaction clinically, it's a really satisfying way of working because you talk to the patients, then you see the patients, you deal with the whole thing. Whereas with the other ones, with telephone consulting, which is often called Dr. First but isn't really, what happens is you have a doctor doing the telephone consulting and you think, oh, that's interesting, but they never see the patient. So you end up, it's like working in a call centre sometimes in that situation. And that's why I developed Dr. First, because I didn't like that feeling. You know, it works really well if you've got the situation that you've got a lot of locums, you know, and you can do it like that. But you swap it between the doctors that can do it, and it's way more efficient than the standard 10-minute way of working. Well, the first one is really easy to do. All you have to do is decide to do it, and then you set up your appointment systems. That takes about a day, I suppose, if you're going to do it like that. The others take a bit more time because you have to plan how you're going to get rid of the backlog, and then you have to train people in the art of if we're doing proper Dr. First, for example, there's a lot more to it than just talking to people on the telephone. It's about changing the way that you think about your work, and also you need to talk to the patients, of course, and explain things to them. And by the time you do all that, it takes between about 4 and 6 months.